Speak.
My name is Stephen Haller, and we're here at the Sheraton Waikiki Hotel in Honolulu, Hawaii. It's December 5th, 1991 at 7:15 p.m. And I'm speaking with Mr. William Ermolovich. Mr. Ermolovich was a shipfitter third class on the destroyer tender Whitney. He was a 20-year-old man
when the war broke out.
When the war broke out on that day. We're doing this tape for the USS Arizona National Historical Site oral history program in cooperation with KHET-TV. And I'd like to thank you very much for being with us today
You're
and
welcome.
sharing some of your memories.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
Good. Could you tell us about how you got into the Navy?
Yes. Well, I was born in Old Forge, Pennsylvania. That's in the anthracite coal mining district of Pennsylvania. I finished high school 1939, and this was still in the Depression era. And that area was really depressed. So I kind of wandered around looking for work. Finally, I had a close relative that was very friendly with the superintendent at one of the steel mills in the Philadelphia area. So they hired me, and the job I had was shoveling buckshot in the steel mill. They used the buckshot for sandblasting. And I got acquainted with the superintendent pretty well, and he was an old Navy man. So during my lunch breaks, we would sit, and he convinced me, maybe you ought to try the Navy. So being in the Philadelphia area where I was working, I went to the recruiting office. And since my home was in the Scranton, Pennsylvania area, I visited the recruiting office, took my physical, and they gave me several weeks to get things ready. Finally, I was told to report to Philadelphia. This was September 25th, 1940. And we got there, and there were a group of us, and I can't think of the officer's name. He says, all you recruits, step forward and take your oath of allegiance. Well, for a moment there, I was stunned. He says, Bill, he said, did you have that tooth taken care of? I said, what? I completely forgot. So he says, well, you don't have to step forward if you don't, if you don't want to. So he gave me like 5 seconds to decide whether I want to go in. So anyway, I decided, well, I'm here. There's a reason why I'm here, and that was the beginning. From there, we took a ferry boat up to Newport, Rhode Island. After 8 weeks of boot camp, they sent us out to San Diego. And now this is 1940 again. I boarded the USS Helm, which was a destroyer, and I would say probably around the 1st of December. And we headed up the coast of California, picked up the cruisers and battleships, and we headed out. And there were 30 of us recruits, and the ground swells were so terrific, 29 out of the 30 got seasick. So we wouldn't dare go below decks. And the old Navy men would always approach us. They knew we were sick. They'd say, how about a big greasy pork chop right now? Well, anyway, they had stored the oranges and the grapefruit on the after deck house. And that's where the 29 of us stayed. And we went through every grapefruit and every orange and every apple. So anyway, we arrived in Pearl Harbor approximately, it could have been the day before, day after, December 7th. I like to just say that was December 7th because it was actually a year
Before.
Yeah, but it could have been a day or two before, a day or two after, right?
But this is December 7th, 1940.
Of 1940, exactly.
Okay.
So we got into Pearl Harbor, and I was transferred almost immediately to the USS Whitney. Went aboard the Whitney, and of course we're all recruits, just plain old seamen. The first work they gave us was chipping paint and polishing the brightwork, scrubbing the decks every morning about 6 with Holy Stone. little piece of abrasive with a little hole in the indentation and with a broom handle. And we'd had one of the boys or one of the seamen sprinkle sand on it, and then we had a guy with a great big hose pouring the salt water. So we just went ahead and, anyway, that was my first job. Then almost within a week or two, they asked if anybody was interested in playing baseball. And boy, I just lighted up. That was me. Never played professional ball, no semi-pro. And back during the Depression, there were what we call sandlot baseball, amateur ball. And that's what we did continuously. So anyway, following week, went out to the ballpark, and I watched the team practice. So when I saw them practice, I said, this is not for me. These guys are just too good. Really, they were professionals. Finally, they says, all right, now, all you new people, you get out there, select the position you think you'd like to play. And of course, I was kind of small, weighed 135, 140, I was kind of wiry. I wasn't fast, but I was quick, and I kind of had a scent for where the ball was going to be. So we practiced, and the coach, the manager was a man called Termite McCann. He'd been in the Navy for 20 years, and so he was getting a little old, and they needed a third baseman. So anyway, after a while, they come out and talk to me. The first question was, are you a professional baseball player? And I was stunned. I said, gee, they must be pulling my leg or something. I says, no. Were you a college baseball player? I says, no. Well, what did you play? I said, just sandlot baseball. So anyway, they needed a third baseman. The shortstop was a man named Doherty. And I believe, from hearsay, that he played for the Binghamton team of the old New York, Pennsylvania League, which was, back in those days, that was pretty tough competition. Incidentally, I just found out that he was killed after he left the Whitney. He was on a destroyer. And okay, well, anyway, they put me on third base, and I had competition. There was a college kid that wanted to make the ball team. His name was Amato from Philadelphia. And I said, uh-oh, here's a college guy. I have no chance. But anyway, they selected me, and they worked me and worked me and worked me. So finally, okay, I got selected. But the crowning glory was, say, 2 or 3 days later, they had an equipment man come up from Honolulu. Now, you got to remember this. Being in Pennsylvania, we didn't have much money. We used baseballs. We'd get the old baseballs where the cover was torn off, and we used friction tape to tape it. Broken baseball bats, we'd put a few nails in it, and the like, okay? And that's where I landed. Then, like I said, the crowning glory was when this equipment man come out and he says, okay, pick out your baseball bats, your gloves, your shoes, everything, and uniforms. And it so happened that the uniforms were identical to what the Cincinnati Reds in the National League were using. Okay? Well, then that was, okay, that's part of that part now, okay? Well, then this went on doing 41. Mm-hmm. And eventually, you know, December 7 came, being a Sunday morning, and we usually played baseball Sundays. In fact, we played at the Honolulu Stadium, which is not there anymore. Sunday morning, we'd sleep in and eat early, take the motor launch in to Mary's Point, I believe, the bus to the Honolulu Stadium, and then we'd play the various teams. The teams I remember were the Honolulu Indians, I believe, the Rising Sun. They were like an all-Japanese team, the Puerto Ricans, all Puerto Ricans. Uh-huh. Okay, well then that morning, I heard this clanging noise. There was a man, we slept just above the magazine where the ammunition was stuck.
Okay, you were sleeping.
That's right.
All right.
And here's this noise. Incidentally, my friend who slept above me was 6'4", a fellow by the name of Keith Borg. And all he did was read poetry. Big boy, could have been a fantastic fullback or something. And I shouted, what the heck's going on? And of course the response was, they're bombing the shit out of us. I says, who? We don't know. So immediately, we had our battle stations. So up we go up the battle station.
What was yours?
I was on the port side of the Whitney on the boat deck. But anyway, I want to go back to where we come up the starboard side. So I was 2 decks down, got to the main deck, up another ladder to the boat deck. This starboard side looking out to where the Arizona was. And by this time, maybe the attack was under for 5, 6, 7 minutes. And this I could honestly say, unless somebody could dispute it, that the bomb about that time went right down from where I was standing, or we were standing on, that the bomb went right down the stack. Now, I could be mistaken, see, but immediately we went over to our battle stations. Now, we had 5 destroyers tied alongside: the Conningham, the Tucker, the Case, the Reed, and the Selfridge. And of course, our 5-inch guns was on the boat deck adjacent. Now, this was a surface gun. It was not an anti-air. It probably couldn't move up or down more than 10 or 15 degrees. But of course, we had to stay at our battle station.
And your battle station was?
On the port side there on the boat deck on this 5-inch 51 caliber.
Okay.
And it took like about 10 or 12 men to man the gun, because this must have been a World War I gun. We had like about 5 shellmen. We'd have to pass the shells. Same with powdermen, and then we had a man there with a big ramrod. Okay, so that's where we were. Now, during the attack, of course, we were restricted to our battle station. Now, during the attack, after the planes come in, the torpedo planes drop their torpedoes, and the bombers drop their bombs. Now, these planes, whether they were the same planes or not, would just skirt the channel and strafe. So if they came from the port side, we would run over to the starboard side because we were shielded above. And if they came from the starboard, we'd run to the port, but we had to stay out of the way of the other men because we did have anti-aircraft guns on there. And at that time, we had some old 3-inch anti-aircraft and 50 caliber machine guns. Well, being general quarters, this went on for quite a while. We had the first wave come in, second wave come in later, but yet we had to stay at our battle stations because there was word out. In fact, there was a radio station hooked up there somewhere with a lot of propaganda saying that they're landing on Wahoo, you know, and oh, that scared us. Now, the one thing, now at this point in time, we were not scared. It was just such a surprise. It's like watching fireworks. You could see all the planes flying overboard, up above. And there's some of the stories I've read are, well, it's not really a serious confusion, but I'd say there was maybe 10,000 sealing. And in some of the stories, they says that there was a bright, beautiful, sunny morning. Now, there...
You were saying it was a bright sunny day and the lights went out there, Bill.
Yes, I see that.
All right, let's pick it up again. And,
okay, we'll go back to the Arizona, which is a big thing because everything revolves around that. Our organization, the Pearl Harbor survivors, everything's the Arizona Memorial, this, that. But anyway, when I got up the starboard side, up to the boat deck, as we looked out, this dive bomber, it was not a high flying bomber, what they call them, horizontal bombers that are way up. And from where we were situated, it looked exactly like the bomb went down the stack. And of course, at that time, it was impossible to really tell whether we could hear anything, because I would say we're anywhere from maybe a quarter of a mile to a half a mile away, and that's not much when you're on water. And all of a sudden, there was a big puff, and all of a sudden, there was just a lot of smoke. I didn't see any flame at the time.
Did you have a reaction to that in particular, or
no,
you
well,
just
no,
went ahead
it was just like watching fire. See, it was such a surprise. We were not scared or anything at that point in time, right?
Yeah.
So, like I said, after a few seconds, you know, we ran over to the port side, and we were at our 5-inch 51 caliber gun. As I says, it was a surface gun. Okay. So. I'm not quite sure whether it was during the first wave or second wave. We had a number of B-17s that were going to be flying into Pearl Harbor. And I get that might have been the confusion. And they did fly. We were in the East Lock, moored at the East Lock in Pearl Harbor. And these airplanes flew between the mountains or the hills and the Whitney. And we had our 5-inch trained on, and we would have fired, except we could see the insignias and whatnot that they were our planes. And in the meantime, I guess, they did have, they were relaying information that they were our B-17s. Well, there was a lot of confusion, like I said, but at this moment, we still weren't scared. Our biggest fear was this, and I've repeated this more than once. We had a planking deck, and our fear was that if we took a hit, that those splinters would just run in, you know, completely. And this is talk of young kids at the time. And we said if we were going to die, we'd like to just die immediately, instantly, rather than maybe getting hit and having the slivers enter our bodies and suffer from it. And that was our biggest fear at this time. But that was it, but we joked about it. Maybe we wouldn't let on we were scared. Nobody would admit that they were scared. Well, anyway, this took place during this period of time. You could see the planes over there, a lot of smoke and things like that. And then an incident occurred where this one airplane was flying between Ford Island and where we were moored. And I found out today, December 5th, 1991, I just met a man that was on the USS Tucker, and he said that it was their ship. They fired at this plane, and to me, it looked like it stopped dead in the air. The plane rolled, and the pilot just rolled right out into the water. But other than that, it's difficult to say, you know, what had happened to him, whether he was killed or whether he swam ashore and taken prisoner. That we couldn't tell, say. So this continued, and after the second attack, we still were required, we were at battle stations to man our stations. And then about 12 o'clock, by that time, they start relieving some of us so we could get some rest. So now it's time to go down below decks and eat. Well, we found out there were 2-man Jap subs in the harbor. And that was the beginning of the fear. We didn't want to go below decks. And immediately about that time, I was on the starboard side, the boat deck, and there was a PT boat going by, and it was hemming this 2-man sub. And of course, we had the USS Solace, the hospital ship, probably moored about 300, 400, 500 feet from Ford Island. And the submarine went under the Solace and shut off their power and remained silent. Now, the PT boats could not use their depth charges because of the hospital ship. And once again, it was just recently, because I was puzzled, what had happened to the sub? Well, this man who was on the USS Solace, I met him again, another man today. He said, what happened to those? You know, I said, I never heard a word. He says, when our destroyers prepared to go to sea, the submarine followed the destroyers out to the channel, and at the channel, to the exit to the ocean, they had a net there. And this man told me that when they got that far, they didn't open the net, and that's when they dropped the depth charges on the submarine. Okay, so that was that afternoon, but it was like 6.5, 7 hours after the sub attempted to make the escape. Well, anyway, during the afternoon now, as time was going on, we're getting anxious, we're getting scared, we're hearing the radio reports, the Japanese have secured the Philippines, they're going to land on Oahu, and we're shaking. And then, as it got dark, that's when we feared just about everything. We wouldn't even go below decks unless we had to go below decks. And that night, I had the 4 to 8 watch on a 3-inch anti-aircraft gun, which was located just around the bridge of the ship. And approximately, I would say, 6, 7 o'clock, well, you got to understand, everything was blacked out. And the word was that we would not fire unless we got word that they were enemy airplanes. Well, evidently, being nervous, somebody opened up and we shot down, I'm not sure whether it was 6 of our own airplanes that were coming in off to Lexington, I believe. And
it was Enterprise, but
well,
I believe it was Enterprise.
Was it the Enterprise? Okay, because there were several carriers out to Midway or Wake Island, and they were on their way back.
Did you open? You were on the gun crew then? That,
yes, I was on that. We like to think that, not like to think, you know, we got to speculating, well, maybe we were the ones that did it. But of course, when they opened fire, you probably had 1,000 anti-aircraft guns. So I had that watch. I got off at 8 o'clock. But during the interim, we're getting nervous, more nervous, scared and everything. And after I got off a watch, why, it was just fear all the way from there. And I've never told anybody this, but if you've seen, well, like the man says, you grow up in a hurry when you're in war. If you want to see, like we like to think we were grown-up men all of a sudden, shed tears, you know, I'd go up there by myself. You wouldn't do it in front of anybody. And I'm sitting up there, and I hadn't enlisted. I did, you know, into the service, and I'm saying, now, boy, I wonder if I made the right choice. So I shed some tears, this, that, and the other thing. And, well, I can't remember now whether I slept or not. But the next day, we got a work crew together. Now, all during the night, we had people fighting fires, rescuing the men from the battleships. And the next morning early, we got a work crew together, and we went over to see whether we could assist. Well, we couldn't get near the battleships because the oil had covered the water, and it was so hot and scorching hot. As I understand, a lot of the men died that way because they were underwater, and as they come up, the heat from the oil burning, I guess they almost died instantly. So anyway, we went over to close to where the West Virginia was. Now, this is something that I forgot, but one of my friends I saw today, he says, "Remember that, Bill?" I said, "No." So we went over, and all of a sudden somebody gave us the word, "Get out of there. We think the West Virginia's going to blow up." So we hightailed it out of there because we couldn't do it, we couldn't help. So we went over to the dry dock. Now, the USS Pennsylvania was aft, and 2 destroyers, the Cassin and the Downs, were in dry dock. So we got over there, and we were going to see what we could do to help. By the time we got there, when most of the damage or whatever was cleaned up, anybody had died that had taken them. Of course, we did a little helping, but there wasn't much to help. So, okay, so we couldn't help. So what we did, the next thing we did, we went over to the morgue, looking for names of our shipmates and friends to see whether they had perished or whether they were at the hospital. So most of the day was spent doing that. So then we went back to the ship, and once again we still had our battle stations to man, and nothing happened. Now this thing, the next thing that strikes me is this, is that the USS Raleigh, which was moored approximately where the carriers would have been moored. And the Raleigh had taken a torpedo hit or whatever, and it looked like it was going to sink. And of course, we were a destroyer tender, and we had like 10 divers there. So we immediately went over there, tied up to it, and our divers went down, and they built a wooden cofferdam completely around the ship for ballast to keep it floating. And the next thing that I remember, as it got dark, I was now on my battle station was a 5-inch 51 caliber gun, port side aft this time. And it was a very, very dark night. And we looked out there and we saw a silhouette of a ship. And being radio silent, no lights, we had everything ready to go. We were going to blast it out of the water. And they turned the spotlight on, and there was one of our yard tugboats coming along. But anyway, we stayed there for a day or two to keep the Raleigh afloat and whatnot. And thereafter, it was a case of repairing some of the destroyers that needed some help. Of course, most of the destroyers got underway that same afternoon or the same day. But then it was, well, it wasn't back to normal business, but yet we began servicing some of the destroyers. Now, we had a task force. I don't remember for sure, but it consisted, I believe, of the USS Indianapolis, some destroyers, minesweepers, went down to either Johnson Island or one of the islands that were approximately, I'm guessing, 400 or 500 miles away. So they weren't too far from Pearl Harbor, and when they come in, of course, some of them, the destroyers needed service, so they stopped alongside. So, the thing I remember about this, I had a friend of mine on the USS Long, and I met him years ago, and he said, gee, we were at the mouth of the channel, because in order to be considered being on Oahu, you had to be within 3 miles, the limit. And of course, my friend, he was boasting. I never said. This was early after the war ended. We had gotten home. He said, we're at the channel, but subsequently in our quarterly publication, they listed all the ships that weren't at Pearl Harbor. And sure enough, there it was, USS Long, 200 miles south of Pearl Harbor and the like. But this, I'm just interjecting this. To me, it's like a bit of humor. And then as we get older now, there's certain things you kind of forget. And like being here for the 50th, it's really refreshing because we are talking to men that were on the Whitney, and it's surprising. There are certain things that I thought, well, maybe I dreamt about them or had nightmares. Then somebody will make a remark about something, and then all of a sudden our conversation is going. So there we were at the cubicle, which at the Sheraton, which lists all the ships and the personnel that are going to be attending this 50th anniversary here in at Pearl Harbor, let's say, because we're slated to go to the Punch Bowl Cemetery, and we're all planning to go there and out to Pearl Harbor. And another sideline here is, of course, the women, they're standing around wondering, what are you guys talking about? You keep repeating yourself. But what you're going to do is we get a little older, we forget things, we remember things, and it's very enlightening now. I've met some of the men that I hadn't seen since 42, 43, and 44. It's like we never were separated. We could sit right down and say, hey, Bill, remember this man or this man? And the like. So it's very, very, I wouldn't give this up for anything.
That's great. Let me ask you one final question.
Sure.
What's your most vivid memory of that day?
Of that day, yeah, I think it's that airplane, the Japanese plane that got hit by a shell from the USS Tucker. Now, when the Arizona, there was so much smoke and chaos in the area of the battleships. And even though I could see a big puff come up after the bomb went into the, as I said, into the stack. And at this time, you don't know where the noise is coming from because anti-aircraft shells are going up and bombs are being dropped. So I wouldn't say that that was the most important. In fact, I never gave it much thought until years later. But when we saw this airplane get hit and the pilot roll over and out, that to me always stuck in my mind.
Coming back after 50 years, what means the most to you?
Meeting all my shipmates that are still alive. It's wonderful. It's unbelievable how many. Now, Pearl Harbor wasn't, what we did at Pearl Harbor was fine. We always consider the ship we were on at Pearl Harbor was our ship, whether we were on there 1 month or a year or 5 years. But just for that one day, that is our ship.
That's interesting to hear. I'm sure we only have a short amount of time left on this tape. If you don't mind, you said you had a lot of pride in your ship, and you mentioned a couple of nicknames, one for yours and one for the rival. Can you just
for the
record?
Well, there are 2 ships here. The USS Whitney, which was the Vikings. It was commissioned probably in the middle, late 20s. And our sister ship was the USS Dobbin. Now, meeting some of the Dobbin sailors says the nickname for the Dobbin was called the Dirty Dobbin. And of course, I kind of kid some of the Dobbin sailors and say, hey, if you look pretty big, I'm not going to tell it, unless you tell me the nickname. Otherwise, I'm not going to say anything.
Well, we appreciate you sharing it on tape. We won't show it to any Dobbin guys here and get you in trouble.
You better not, because they're pretty big boys.
All right. Bill, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to share your
I'm very happy. I hope maybe this might be some information in here that perhaps somebody could use.